African leaders have arrived in Washington, D.C. for the US-Africa summit hosted by President Joe Biden this week. The summit will look at political and trade relations between Africa and the United States. For more, we're joined by the SABC's international news editor, Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, thank you for being with us in studio. So, who is representing South Africa? The president will remain in this country, correct?
Well, indeed, President Ramaphosa will not be joining his counterparts in Washington, the United States of America, for this summit because of the ANC conference. Yes, indeed, there are issues around Phala, and Parliament will converge on Tuesday to vote or to take a decision in terms of a way forward on the report on Phala, but the real reason is that I don't think he was planning to go to Washington because of the ANC conference that's starting on Friday, and I think it will be a low-key delegation that will be representing South Africa at the Africa-US summit in Washington.
Okay, do we know who's going yet and what South Africa would want to achieve at this summit?
It hasn't been announced yet in terms of who will lead the delegation. The Minister of International Relations is having a media briefing tomorrow. I think this is something that she will clarify in terms of how are they going to handle this, because this is a very important meeting, and you know that the relations between South Africa and the United States of America has been very, very sound, particularly under the tenure of Joe Biden. You know that during the pandemic, it is the United States of America that supported South Africa and India when they were pushing for the TRIPS waiver in terms of therapeutics and any scientific method and training and know-how in terms of manufacturing of vaccines.
Are there any issues on the agenda that could possibly undermine relationships between African countries and the US? What's topical?
I think for me the issue will be the war in Ukraine. I know that the United States of America is very aggrieved. When you listen to the ambassador of the United States of America at the UN, she is always complaining about Africa's position on several occasions when they had to vote for the resolution that speaks to the issues related to Ukraine. South Africa in particular has chosen not to participate in terms of voting, rather abstain, and not only South Africa, many countries, and therefore there has been this lingering question from the United States of America that why is Africa not supporting what they put before the Security Council and even in the General Assembly. And I think that issue is going to also dominate the talks. But you also have the issue of climate change. We've recently concluded climate change summit in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. You know that the African country or the Africa group was very vocal and also pushing that the developed nations should support developing countries, and the implementation of renewable energy should not be a way to stifle or to send us back years when we were struggling to develop, because this is the time for Africa to develop, and therefore you have to balance the two, development and also ensuring that you deal with issues of climate change. You also have another issue. You know that President Ramaphosa at the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia, he put before the summit that the African Union should be admitted as a full member of the G20, and therefore President Biden is saying that he is supporting this call in the same way he supported South Africa and India and developing countries on issues that were related to TRIPS waiver.
In relation to Ukraine that you brought up earlier, certainly African nations didn't vote as a bloc at the UN. Different nations took different stances, and there have been criticism before that African leaders should really unite. Do we need to take united positions on important issues, or is it fair enough to have different ideas on this continent but try and negotiate together when it's needed?
Well, when you engage these big countries with, the economic muscle, the political muscle, the military might, you have to speak in one voice. African countries are just too small. I mean, therefore, you are able to push for what you want as the African continent when you speak in one voice, because then you're talking about a population of almost 2 billion, and therefore you can speak with a better, a strong voice from a strong position. But if countries engage these big countries bilaterally, it does work, but sometimes it doesn't work, because remember, you are weaker economically, and therefore they are able to kind of push you aside and push their own interests, and therefore you have to speak in one voice. But it is very difficult. You know, Africa with different regions and different history backgrounds, you find a situation where sometimes we hold different views as a continent and countries or regions. And therefore, let's see, many people are saying the leaders who are going there must go there knowing exactly what they want from the United States of America. And I saw leaders from the SADC region, Hagengob, Hishelema, Chakwera from Malawi, including Uganda, President Museveni, saying that they are ready to engage the Americans.
Yeah, and I remember with COVID-19, we saw that united push for access to vaccines. That was necessary to stand together. The president recently saying that the Western nations that hoarded vaccines, that was a gross violation of human rights. All right, we've run out of time, but thank you very much. Sophie Mokoena, international news editor, and the international desk will follow that summit closely coming up this week.